learned along the way with you.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get started in the discussion. So we will be talking about campaign strategy. And there we go. These are some of the topics that we will go through. So what is a strategy, your vision, research, methods, aims, targets, theory of change, and so on. And I know that here is a little picture that explains it better.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say here is that there's so many different ways to make a campaign strategy, think about a campaign strategy, and lay out a campaign strategy. But I think this is how we think about it and what works for us and helps keeps us focused on where we're going and how we're going to get there. But in its key, I think, and this will be the format that we're going to work you through today. So by the end of today, you'll be able to fill out all of the bits in this. We're going to start by talking about the research, so the land or the map we are working on, the ecosystem map we're working on, and then we'll work through all of these other bits on here too. And I think the most important with this, the best quote I've ever heard about strategy is from Jane McAlevey, who many of you might know, especially if you were at the session, the last session. But she has this great quote that says, a strategy is knowing what you have and then what you need to get what you want. And I think that's like it in a nutshell. It's about just being realistic, grounded, knowing what you have, where you are, and knowing what you need to get where you want to go. So yeah, that's it. Let's get started. Oh, and Vera, will you share the link, or I will share the link. So we have put together a worksheet to help you fill out all of these different bits, and also to help that you don't need to share, you don't need to take too many notes. And we will also share this recording with you afterwards. So here is the worksheet. Oh, I better make sure. Yeah, here we go. Here is your worksheet. And lots of the tools that we talk about today are also linked in the worksheet and more. Over to you, Vera.
Awesome. Let's get started. Okay, so as Ruby mentioned, there are a lot of different ways to do this, but what we like to do is start with a vision. And so your vision should be something that is really clear and tangible and that explains what you're working towards and why you're working towards it. It can include implicit or explicit values. And it is an important part of your campaign because it keeps yourself and others on track, as well as it allows you to bring in other people, you know, that might share the same vision as you. And so you can kind of consider it as like your North Star in a way. It isn't necessarily something that you might get to this week or this month. And if it's super big, you know, it might not be something that is changed in this lifetime, but it is something that collectively we might be all working towards. And so I think we have some examples. Yeah. And so one example is a future where everyone, regardless of their background, where they grew up, is a respected part of a vibrant, connected community and country where everyone feels a sense of belonging and knows their children will have what they need to thrive. Another example that we have is from our Dental for All team. Aotearoa is a place where everyone has what they need to thrive and is able to access free, universal, to tiriti consistent oral health care. So you can see that here, the Dental for All team is focusing on oral health care. As you can see, visions can be quite broad. And so in the next few slides, we'll explain how you can narrow it down and focus on a specific target and the tools that you can use to kind of help you on that journey. And so one of those tools, as Ruby mentioned, is research. So once your vision is done, the next step would be intensive research. So asking yourself questions like, where is the public opinion and understanding on the issue you care about? Sometimes, but depending on the area that you're focusing on, you can look at polls if they exist. Other times, news articles are quite important and can be quite helpful. So see, maybe how often your topic is mentioned in news articles. How is it mentioned? What is the tone? How's the framing? What are people's opinions in those articles? And if you want to go an extra mile, another good example would be social media. So actually going into, Facebook comment sections, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, to kind of gauge on how other people's opinions are. Um, yeah. And then I'll pass it over to you to talk about building.
Yeah, so do you want to jump to the next slide to talk about this? This is this really cool tool. So yeah, movement, the question you're asking yourself is what is already happening out there? Is there a movement already around this kaupapa that I'm working on? What's happening in that movement? Who else is working on it? What are they doing? What's their place in it? But this is a really cool tool that's been developed by MovementNet. And so it's built off Bill Moyer's movement map, which some of you might be familiar with. And what they've done, they kind of mapped out many movements and yeah, kind of like the natural move or the pattern that many of our movements take. And I think two really interesting things on here is trigger points where something hits the news. I think you could think about the TPB as a trigger point with the Te Tiriti Justice Movement. And another really important thing to note is that not all wins happen at the peak. Like often actually a win happens kind of in this evolution phase or in the phases afterwards where you kind of have consolidated your power and where you like have continued to bring people together who are on your team towards working towards a things. I think it's really important, yeah, just to be aware if you're in a contraction period, like currently your issue has gone underground and not everyone's talking about it. It doesn't mean that you've lost or it's over, but you're in a specific place in the movement, and it's important to think about building your campaigns aware where the movement is at. And this tool is in the worksheet, and they've developing a program with it where you can click on the different stages of movement and it comes up with some insights, including some tactics that might be relevant for that time. So yeah, really encourage you to have a look at it. Oh, the silence means it's me. What what's on the next slide, Vera? What am I talking about next with research?
Our upcoming events, political moments. Is it?
Ah, yeah, that's not long. Oh, yeah, there we go. Upcoming, there, exactly, which is that. What's happening out there? Like, I think we can make events and we can make key moments that are going to be trigger events, but there might already be a potential trigger event coming up that you could jump on, that you could turn into like a thing. Or there might be key decision points that you need to be aware of, in which case the landscape will change that you're working on. Elections, classic political moments that you want to take into consideration when you're building your campaign. And also events of aligned groups, also events of opposition groups that you might want to be aware of as you're moving forward.
Awesome. I'll bring us to SMOT. Something that can be quite helpful is actually sitting down and doing a SWOT analysis. And so it's basically just, thinking about what are your strengths, what resources do you already have available, what does your group, for example, your campaigning group do really, really well. And then you can think about your weaknesses. So what are some of the things that your group might be struggling with? What are some skills that the people in your group don't have? What is something that you could upskill on? And then think about, the opportunities and the threats. So what works in your favor? Who could you collaborate with to share the workload? Who could you collaborate with to, help get your campaign out there, get more people involved, and then think about the threat. So who might actually not like your work? Who benefits from the system not changing that actually might feel attacked by what you're doing? And so asking yourself these questions kind of allows you to remind yourself and your team of your strengths and allows you to prepare for situations where you might be confronted by your weaknesses or threats. And obviously, you don't have to have all of the answers right now, but it's just a really good tool to keep in mind.
Cool. So now you've got your lay of the land. You're figuring out what is the next step or the first step if you're a new group. And I guess just a word on this is I think it's really important to build your group or at least a team. No, very small groups have won amazing campaigns, but campaigning is a collective activity, both for like logistical reasons and for mental health reasons. So before you jump into like nailing your first campaign ask, it's generally a good time to also be asking yourself, who's on my team, and making sure that you're going to build your team around your vision. So making sure you're all on board with the same vision, and then you can kind of I recommend coming through this process together in terms of choosing your first campaign step. Yeah, so it might be what's next if you're in an already established group, or what's first. And do you want to jump to, and there's a couple of different tools that are helpful to help you figure out what the first step in your campaign or what your campaign aim is going to be. And I often think about most campaigns we would plan over a 3-year period, or sometimes you might only have a year. So it's good to have that like ring fence timeline in mind when you're choosing your aim. What is possible within the time we have with the resources in the situation we're in, right? And also what needs to happen first. And do you want to jump to the next slide? So one of the tools, this is from the Campaign Strategy Workbook by Training for Change, who are an awesome group who do tons of cool trainings. So one of the tools is cutting the issue. So you pick kind of up the top what your, in this case, you might actually put your vision, and then under that you might say like, what's the big thing stopping your vision happening? You can do this both ways. And then you start mapping out what are the different symptoms of causes of the problem or the barrier to your vision becoming a reality. And so you put many things on the board as you can. I'm a big lover of the old post-it note, but you can also use online tools like Miro or there's so many online tools. I think Google Docs, you can do drawings in as well. Or get out a massive piece of paper, my favorite, because then you can move things around. And so yeah, you want to get all the different symptoms or all the different causes upholding the barrier out. And then from each of them, you might think like, so what are the first steps we could take that would address that symptom or cause? Like what would be the thing that would help create the conditions for the next evolution or the next bit of progress? And I think this can be really hard for campaign leaders or for change makers, because we feel so passionately about how the world needs to be better and how it could be better. And we kind of want to go straight for gold often. And this is the bit in which we bring our feet truly to the ground and say, okay, what are we going to do next? And I think a really great example of a strategic way this is done is within Action Station's Te Tiriti Justice campaign. Our like ultimate goal is a Te Tiriti o Waitangi honouring Aotearoa, our democracy, in line with Te Tiriti. It's a mana motohake for iwi and whānau. But when we were making our campaign plan last year, and this government was bringing out all of these horrible regressive cuts and attacks on Te Tiriti justice. And there was so many different campaign issues we could have gone after. And the team we made a call to focus on the TPB because two things. We were able to win it. Like we knew we knew that National was kind of hedging their bets. They could have gone both ways on the TPB, depending on public opinion, but there was a pathway to success. And when you're building a movement, you want people to experience success. You want them to have positive experiences of power as much as possible. Um, and also, it was a really clear framing around Te Tiriti. It was such a direct attack. Like there were so many things that this government did, especially in those first 100 days, that were direct attacks on Te Tiriti, but they were harder to frame. For example, like MACA around the marine and coastal environment, cutting off traditional access. That's like a longer, more complex story to tell, but just as valid. Or the removal of 7AA, so the right of Māori children in care to connect back to their culture and also super important, super clear attack on Te Tiriti. But the TPB, the Treaties Principles Bill, was a really clear way to bring people on board and to talk about Te Tiriti itself, right? Because if you think our long-term dream is people honouring Te Tiriti, then they've got to know what it is. And what we knew is last year, actually, at the beginning of the year, not many people really knew what Te Tiriti or Waitangi is and what it means. So it was not only was the TPB an important battle to have, but it was a strategic next step in the movement for Te Tiriti justice, because it allowed us to have the conversation we wanted to be having. And it also allowed us to bring more people into the movement in positive and empowering ways. And maybe just on that as well, when you're cutting the issue, it kind of comes back to who. Oh no, we'll come to targets later. But I think there's also an aspect of like knowing your lane and who else out there is working on that same thing. And that's also something that was really important in the TPB work, like knowing our place as a tauiwi organization and our responsibility in that. And there's another really cool way of thinking about how you choose your point of your first campaign step, which is based on systems thinking. So thinking about like all the different systems that uphold the problem that you're working with, like the relationships, the funding, the resourcing, the narratives, like the commonly held ideas around the issue. So like kind of getting them all out on a piece of paper and thinking about what are the points to intervene in that. And both of the links to this and the intervention points thing is in the handout.
Awesome. I'll take us on to the next topic, which is choosing your method. So if you were here, was it last month? For our first Skillshare, you would have heard Grace talk about the difference in mobilizing versus advocacy versus organizing in great detail. So I'm not gonna do that. I think Ruby will just send in a link to the video, which is on our YouTube that you can watch. But as Ruby mentioned, if your issue is a ring-fenced issue that is quite urgent, there's already a lot of attention on it in the public, there's already a lot of education happening, and you can see that you might win, and you kind of just need like that little push to get it over the line. And that is when you would think about using, advocacy to achieve said change, or trying to mobilize people like we did to make a submission on a bill. Um, if it's a super big topic that is quite complex, that you can't really see a road ahead to win, that is when you go, back to the ground. That is when you go organizing, when you go deep into communities, you talk to people face to face, you meet them where they're at, you educate them on, why you're doing what you're doing. What is it? What even is it? How does it affect you and your community? How does it affect them? How could, together you try and create a better world that benefits everyone living in Aotearoa?
Awesome. So once you've So now you've got everything you need. You've got your aim. You know where you're going. And so now we start to think about, so how are we going to get there? So if do you want to maybe just jump to the slide that shows the whole map? Oh, no, maybe go back to slide 3 just for a second. Oh, sorry. So there we go. Cool. So now we've got our vision, our aim, and now we're moving into this kind of like active part of the campaign. And so the first thing to do is once you've got your aim, it's figuring out who has the power to make your aim a possibility. And if you want to come back there to the actual power analysis slide, that would be good for this. Sorry, one day we'll know how to be able to both be moving it. And maybe go back one actually. Cool. So a power map or power analysis is literally the bit where you start to figure out, or you start to put all the different people that you've been thinking about, talking about, researching, become aware of throughout your research as having a stake in this. You start to put them on the map. So this is absolutely everyone who has a stake in it. And I really encourage you, once again, it's a post-it note situation. And I think it's really important to be really question your assumptions around how much power does this person actually have, or this decision maker. And for example, you might put the Prime Minister at the top because they've got the ultimate power. But we want to be specific, like name Prime Minister Chris Luxon, because that's who is Prime Minister right now. And you need to be thinking about making it as tangible as possible. So at the top, you put along the top, so the up and down axis is about who has the most power to over your aim to help realize the thing that you're trying to make happen within this campaign. And along the left to right is who's most or least on board with it. And so it's really important to map out not just who has the most power over it, but who is your like kind of active opposition. Who's gonna be also making moves to try to keep things the way they are, or to prevent the positive change you're seeking. And then really thinking about all your different allies on the right. And like, I think it's also really important to think about non-traditional allies. For example, when we were working to stop the gold mining here in the Coromandel, at one point when we did this power analysis, we started to think about all the different kind of like hiking groups and like conservation groups, so people who weren't necessarily involved in mining or social change making. And we found this amazing ally in FMC, the Federated Mountaineering Club, who like were people that absolutely no one in our community really knew, but they ended up joining us in an important court case. So I think it's really important to think about like, yeah, go sideways. Don't just look at who's obviously got to be on the table. Think of absolutely everyone, and then start thinking about their relationships to each other as well. Like who is influenced by who. So once you've got your person up the top, perhaps depending, you might think about like, okay, and who are they influenced by, and get really specific. Is it specific groups? Is it specific individuals that they might consider leaders? Think about where they sit on it. And also thinking about like within your allies, like who are the specific leaders within your allies that might be able to move that group as well. I'm going to jump to the next slide. So I've done like it's actually really hard to do things in scale. But yeah, so where this is a power map, or like a representation of a very vague power map. I obviously did not have the space for all the post-it notes needed, but we had a really in-depth one of these. And so this is for the campaign I worked on when I first got here, which was around increasing income support levels. So increasing the benefit in New Zealand. And so when we did this, we had done our research, and we knew that at the time, so that's in 2020, and we knew that Jacinda and Grant were effectively acting as a kitchen cabinet, or a cabinet of two. So we knew that a lot of the decisions that Labour were making really came back to Jacinda and Grant. Not like in this situation, if we could get them over the line, that would work. even though actually at the time Jacinda she wasn't the Minister of Social Development. That was Kama Sepuloni. So we put her at the top, and we put Grant up there with her, and we were like, right, those are the people. We're gonna one of our theories of change. So one of our aims were around moving Jacinda and Grant. And then we mapped everyone else out. Obviously, the NGOs is a very vague way of representing. We put all the different, in this space, we had like over 100 different NGOs, and it wasn't just around here in terms of the ones who supported us, but all over this map. But I put this little tag of NGOs here because we knew there was already a like underlying consensus, not an explicit consensus, but we knew it was probably likely that lots of groups who were working on the front lines of child poverty or poverty in general, that they understood one of the key problems was that our benefit levels, income support levels, hadn't increased in real terms since they were slashed in the 1990s. So we knew that they were likely already pretty on board, but they because of their public standing within society, we put them as actually having quite a bit of power. And in that, we also really dug down into what are the NGOs that Jacinda is most likely to be influenced by. And for example, we knew that Jacinda had a religious upbringing. And so we made the informed guess that she would also be influenced by religious groups or religious NGOs. Yeah. And then the other people that we thought were really important on this map, and I can see I've made a spelling mistake there. I don't know how to frame it. Yeah, there we go. Were people with lived experience of this issue, right? Like people who were trying to survive on income support or actually surviving despite all the odds against them, doing extraordinary things with their families and communities to live. And we figured that they were very on board with this. And we also realized that because of all the narrative and all of that had come out of the mother of all budgets in the 1990s, they weren't experiencing much power in society, and they weren't often they often talked about in this issue of poverty, but not often the ones who were able to do the talking. So when we did this power map, we also decided that it was really important to increase the power of people with lived experience. So we did our power map and we thought, okay, what are we doing? We drew some big line arrows to the right, pulling Jacinda and Grant to the right. We drew a line between the different NGOs we thought they'd be influenced by to Jacinda and Grant. And we also drew a line, a big arrow with people with lived experience that going upwards and thinking about how can we increase their power in this situation. Cool.
Awesome. Love that. So yeah, once you have all of these tools and you've done all of your research, that is when you go to the next step, which is your theory of change, also known as the if then because sentence. And this sentence is basically your anchor throughout this whole campaigning process. Because, campaigning can be really, really long. It can be months, years, and sometimes people can kind of get lost in the action. But your theory of change is what brings you back in, and it allows you to focus on what you have decided that you deem is most important. And so when you first start out and you're first, creating your group, you're coming together, you're planning your campaign, it is super, super useful and helpful to have this discussion. And yeah, definitely expect it to be a quite like long discussion. Don't think that it'll be over within like 30 minutes. Because, sometimes people have different ideas, different definitions of things, different life experiences that they're all trying to bring into this room. And it's super important that kind of at the end of your discussion, you come up with a really clear theory of change that everyone agrees on, because that is what will hold it all together. Yeah, and so we kind of talk about the fact that there are two types of theory of changes. So we have the macro one, which is for your kind of overall campaign. And then we have the micro one, which sits within a specific strategy. And then there are 5 categories of theory of change. And so I'll just talk through them a little bit. So the first one that I'll talk about is the elite power. And so that would kind of focus on decision makers, MPs, and it would kind of sound like if we have an MP in power that represents us, then they would make laws to help our communities thrive because they care about our community's opinion and our community's vote. The other one would be people power. And so that would kind of sound like if we get enough people behind an issue, then it doesn't really matter who's in power because politicians, want to be reelected and they won't go against their voter base. We have consumer power. And so a really good example is the BDS movement. If you're not familiar with it, it stands for boycott, divest, and sanction, and is part of the wider Palestinian movement for liberation. And so what they do really amazingly is they encourage people to divest from companies that, for example, support the illegal occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. And so um, if we take agency and we take away our money from harmful companies, then they won't make profit. And one thing that we know about companies is that that is really the only thing that they want to do. And so they will be forced to change their position on the matter and stop funding, illegal developments being built on stolen land. Another one would be the worldview education one. And so a great example would be all of the amazing Titiriti educators who have been working in this space for decades now and have been working with their own Tauiwi communities to change, racist attitudes and false beliefs into Titiriti solidarity. And so something like a theory of change could sound like if we educate enough people, then we will be able to, if we educate enough people on Titiriti o Waitangi, then we will be able to honor Titiriti o Waitangi because people have changed their beliefs and understand the importance and their role in honoring Titiriti o Waitangi. And so the last one would be collective power, which is quite similar to people power. But collective power focuses not really on the individual, but more on groups or organizations. A really good example would be actually the councils here. So the councils across Aotearoa were actually the first ones to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And through their action, there was pressure on central government to actually make a statement. And so your theory of change, if it's micro or macro, can fit into one of these 5 categories. And now we have 2 little examples. And I'll just read the first one. And it would be awesome if maybe in the chat you could write down what type of the 5 you think the first one is. And so the first one is if we prove there's a strong public support for addressing child poverty by increasing income support levels, then Jacinda and Grant will decide to increase them in the next budget because Labour is led by popular opinion. Ooh. Maybe I'll just do this. Okay, we have some people power, we have some elite power, collective power, more elite power. Awesome. Yeah, so the first one would be considered elite power, decision-making power. So focusing on Jacinda and Grant, who are empowered to make those changes. And then the next one is if we educate enough people on the negative environmental effects of seabed mining, then people will be more likely to get involved with a campaign to resist seabed mining because they know the negative effects it will have on their communities. Worldview education. People power, more worldview, 2 and 5. Out 2 and 4. Authored. Awesome. Yes. So this one would be an example of worldview education power. And this one would be, for example, a micro theory of change that could sit within a strategy of your campaign. Awesome. Now I'll pass it back to you, Ruby.
Oh. Shall we stop for questions? Actually, we have just whizzed through a lot. Yeah, I think now's the time to stop. Does anyone have any questions? I don't know if I can see the Q&A, but it could be a question about power analysis or theory of change, choosing your methods, your aim, research. We'll also stop for questions at the end as well. But if anyone has any burning questions that you want to put out now, hopefully that means you just get it all and it's all just making a lot of sense and it's not overwhelmed. But the good news is you have the worksheet and we're recording this and we're going to send it out as well. So you can go back and look through it. And there is always Vera and I here that you can email and ask to have a campaign chat with because we love that. So, oh yeah, there is a question. Our view on polling versus submissions. I think they show different things. Yeah, I like submissions shows how many people are active in it, right? Like I think, Vera, do you want to jump to slide 20 just for a second? I think this will be a good way to. One more? Is there 20? Yeah, cool. Oh. So this is spectrum of allies. And so this is like when you're planning your campaign, it's like you've got all of these groups who are active, who are out there and have a feeling about their campaign. This is basically the spectrum of how people care about this. So your active allies are like your base, the people you're working with, people who get the issue, people who, yeah, the people that you're actively working with. Your passive allies are people who agree with you, but they're not necessarily active on the issue. They're just they think that addressing child poverty is right, or honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi is the honourable thing to do, but they're not active in any campaign or any community way in that. Neutral people are the people who just don't know. Passive opposition, the same as passive allies, but the opposite. They generally don't agree, but they're not going to do anything about it. And active opposition, that's like the people you're fighting. And so when you and in our next session, we're going to go more into the spectrum of allies, but an interesting thing to know about this is generally like at the beginning of the campaign, what you find is you've got 15% active opposition and 15% active allies. And then the rest, the spreaders and the rest. So two things. One thing first on polling. Polling helps you know who sits in where of the spectrum of allies. So polling is really helpful in that research period, like before you begin your campaign, before you start trying to change things. Polling's really helpful to understand what the landscape you are working with, where are people currently sitting without, yeah, before you start intervening. And so polling is a honest way of getting a read of the land. Um, Submissions, on the other hand, so in polling, you get to understand all of these people on the spectrum. In submissions, you get to understand how many active opposition you have and how many active allies you have. So, for example, in the TPB campaign, as we were working towards the submission period, our aim was to get as many people from passive allies and neutrals and maybe passive opposition, but we're mainly focusing, because we had a short time frame, on moving people from being neutral on the issue or passive allies to being willing to take action for Te Tiriti, so to become an active ally. So yeah, I think that, is there anything you would add about to that question, Vera?
No, that was a great explanation.
Awesome. Cool. Well, if
Um,
there aren't, oh,
we
sorry.
do have one more question in the Q&A box, and it's focusing on the 5 different categories of the theory of change. So our worldview approach is always going to be long-term strategies. Is it common, effective to have a quick short-term worldview strategy, or is that just when it blends into people power?
Yeah, great question. Do you want to talk about that, Vera, or do you want me to answer that?
Um, Maybe you go first.
Sure. Um, so I think that's when Vera was talking about like the macro and the micro theories of change, right? Like, um, some groups base their whole intervention in a social change, their whole theory of change, their whole intervention in the ecosystem around a worldview theory of change, i.e., the treaty educators. On the other hand, within your specific campaign, you might engage a worldview or education strategy to help you achieve your aim. For example, for the TPB, our aim was to ensure it was voted down at the first reading. Oh, yeah, actually it was, and then it ended up going to, voted down at the second reading. But and then, and one of our theories of change about how we ensured that happen was to make sure that there was a huge amount of submissions. And actually, if I'm honest with you, we were aiming for 50,000 opposed submissions. Our dream, like our stretch goal, was 200,000. So the fact that there was over 300,000 submissions with the majority of them being in opposition was like pretty glorious. Um, so yes, worldview in education can be a theory of change. In that, so the aim, if you think about the TPB example, one of the targets within our campaign, the people we identified as having the power to help enact our change, were everyday people making submissions. So the theory of change was around people making an extraordinary number of submissions. And so the underlying theory of change with that included an education or a worldview, like it was one of our key tactics. So does that make sense? Or is there anything you would add, Vera?
Yeah, I guess it's just really dependent on, yeah, what your goal is, really, what your aim is, and what you and your organizing team deems is the most effective way to get to where you want to get. And it can be really different depending on what campaign. And sometimes it changes. And sometimes that's when you actually have to have a conversation with your team and be like, hey, actually, we've, been doing this work for so long. Is this theory of change still serving us? Or is this something where we need to come back in and think about, do we actually need to change our theory of change? Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Um, cool. And so the other half of that question around is it common and effective? Yeah, it totally is common and effective and valid. And do you remember, if you move to the next slide, this kind of takes us nicely to the next step of number 16. So number 16, yeah. So you might have multiple theories of change happening. And for example, education theory of change within a campaign might not just be important and relevant because it helps get you towards your next aim, but because you know it is needed in the long term to get you towards your vision. So, I mean, education is always effective. Flyers, leaflets, community meetings, all of these things are also always important, and can be effective. Whether they can be the sole theory of change, like whether you could run a campaign that just looks like this with one theory of change that's all targeted at education. I don't know. I don't know if that would create the leverage that you need. Cool. I just 1 second. I've just anyway, my power, I'm gonna plug my computer and that was dumb. But it's a bit of a scramble. So I'm gonna keep going and I think we should be okay. So now we've gone through all of these steps. We've talked about our vision, we talked about our aim, we've talked about a target. We used a power analysis or a systems of a change and interventions point tool to help us choose how our targets are. We've figured out what our theory of change is. And like the theory of change is like really the key in a strategy. It's we've identified who has the power to enact the change that we want and what will actually make them do it. The bit after the because is really important. And maybe just to add on the theory of change to what Vera said as well, is it's so important to like read your theories of change out loud to people, like really test if you believe they are like realistic. Because I think often we're like, oh, I'm filling out the formula. And then actually there maybe like you're missing some logic steps in there. There's a really great cartoon anyway, that basically shows like theories of change. Like a very common problem in change making is our theory of change is like A, and then something magical happens, and then C. And we often fall into that. So yeah, reading your theory of change out loud to yourself is a really good way to like double check it, but also reading it out to multiple people. Don't just test it within your group, test it with other people that you trust outside of the change making system. And so once you've tested and verified your theory of change and any underlying assumptions that it relies on, you can start thinking about what you're actually going to do about it. And so that's where your goals come in, or we call them SMARTY goals because that's more strategic. And so SMARTY stands for strategic, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. And in your worksheet, there is also a link which explains more about SMARTY goals and like how to kind of like work through them and choose tactics that relate to them as well. So I really recommend following through that. I'm just reading this note from Ginia about yeah. Great point. And also love Toiwi Tautoko. They do such great work. Actually used to be part of Action Station, or like a project that we collabed on before it took its own legs. So SMARTY goals. So you want to think about like what are the measurable things that we could make happen, that if we made happen would make our theory of change be enacted. And so measurable, time bound is really important too. And then once you've kind of got your goal of like what are the actual things that you want to have happen, you can start think about the different ways you're going to achieve them. And so it's actually quite hard to talk about in vague terms. So let's jump over to the next slide. And here is an example of one of the theory of changes and one part of the campaign that we did for increasing income support levels. So we had identified Jacinda and Grant as our targets, that we had our theory of change, which Vera talked about earlier. And so these are two of our Smarty goals. And I didn't have time to like, this was a campaign over a longer period of time. So there's, you know, this isn't complete, but this is some examples. So we knew that Labour are driven by popular opinion. And so we knew that in order to get them to do increase income support, we had to prove the majority of people in New Zealand wanted it to increase. And so in reality, tactics all interrelate in different ways. So if I was going to encourage you when you're laying out your tactics to think what has to happen first to do the next one, or actually in this situation, I've kind of like done it the opposite way. Like, so lots of these tactics like welfare tautoko, the Toby Morris cartoon that we co-wrote with Child Poverty Action Group and then commissioned. The open letter with the NGOs, lived experience media, that was kind of all leading towards polling, getting the right polling result. And so we did polling at the beginning to figure out where we were at. And then we also did polling at the end, well, polling partway through the campaign to see where we were at with it. And that polling result came back that over 7 in 10 people in Aotearoa wanted income support levels to go up or agreed that that was the right way to address child poverty. And so we publish those results and use it as a key piece of leverage to prove to Labour and Jacinda and Grant in particular that that's what people wanted. And it worked. I mean, on the back of after that polling, they sent an email was sent actually to MSC to say, from Jacinda saying, I want to put up income support levels by $50. Unfortunately, MSC wrote back and said, oh, that would be too difficult, and negotiated Jacinda down to $20 increase, stepped increase. And that was like, in our research, we hadn't thought about that. We hadn't thought about the fact that public service was so captured by conservative views, in particular the top of MSC. We had no strategy in this where we thought, oh, who are the people at the top of MSC that might block change? So that was a really good learning as well. When you're doing like we didn't really focus on the active opposition side. We didn't and think about that in our strategies. And actually we should have been thinking about that, and we could have built a strategy that may have at least not necessarily changed who those people were or changed their opinions, but lessened their power in the time we wanted to get the change through. Yeah, and so you'll see within this, another point on tactics is to note that often tactics relate to multiple goals or even to multiple theories of change. Like we've got lived experience media in here, so that's something that we did. Like we supported, worked with, and provided wraparound support. So people with lived experience of income support levels could be telling their own stories in the media. And we also had a thing going with We Are Beneficiaries, like amazing group of artists that would do art for the people who had told their stories. We provided a lot of support in lots of different ways to people to make it doable, but we knew that was one way to break through all the like commonly held bullshit that people had around people who receive income support, was to hear and see the real life stories of the people we're talking about. And another tactic we did, which is in both of these and relates to both of these goals, was the open letter from NGOs. So one of our goals as a whole was to have over 50 NGOs and thought leaders who we knew Jacinda and Grant would be influenced by, but also would influence the wider public, being unified in the need to increase income support. So the open letter was kind of like a way, we wrote an open letter basically saying increase income support. And we went out to different people and got their sign on, and we actually ended up with like over 70 different NGOs signing on to it. And it was really like on the back of that was quite soon after we launched that we got the really positive polling result as well. So I think it also influenced public opinion. And in that, because once again, because of Jacinda's background, we thought about like what are the church groups, what are the church leaders that we could get on board with this, and we made sure that we reached out to them early on and ensured they came on board. And then in terms of thought leaders, one example of what we did there with like op-eds and press conferences. We pitched op-eds to places we knew Grant would be reading. So we knew Grant, as the finance minister of the time, would be well, he'd be getting the Dom Post, or it's changed its name now, on his desk. I think it's every Tuesday. Every MP gets it. And we also knew that he'd be watching things like interest.co.nz, which is like an economic media platform. And we thought about who he'd be influenced by, and we managed to talk to Garol Karaglu, who's used to be the ex-head of Treasury, but had moved to Vic University and had just published a book around well-being, or like the importance of well-being in economics. So we thought, when we did our power analysis, we thought, oh, you might not be all the way on board with increasing income support levels, but you're warm. And so we met with him and we worked with him to pitch an op-ed from him in interest.com, because we knew that would be one place Grant would be looking at. Yeah, maybe I think that's probably enough for now. Oh, sorry. And then the one more thing on tactics is, do you want to move? Oh, sorry. Is there anything you would add here, Vera?
Maybe just a small thing that I think you may have already touched on. The really good part about Smarty Goals is that, it allows you to think about equality and, was it inclusion? And so sometimes when we're in a campaign, we tend to attract people that are similar to us. And so when we make goals, we think about tactics that would work for us. And so thinking about a Smarty goal allows you to actually step out of your bubble and think about, oh, how does this tactic affect other people that I might not be connected with, but that are part of, the wider movement? That would this include someone, or would this exclude someone? Would this accidentally harm someone? Or would this, help someone? And so it's just really good to think about that, because I feel like, within the wider movement, we all need each other, and we wouldn't want to harm each other accidentally when we're already facing so much from the opposition.
Kia ora. Such a good point. Thank you, Vera. Yeah. So yeah, I think unintended consequences, not just for people, but for systems and relationships and resource flows, are also worth thinking about. And yeah, so when you're thinking about your tactics, you want to be thinking about what will effectively move your targets, like what will actually affect them. And when you do that, you'll be thinking about, who do they listen to, who do they care about, where do they listen? So what I was talking about, interest.com. And also the other question you need to be thinking about is like, what do they want, or what are they afraid of? And I think you'll be thinking about that in your theory of change as well. And that's also in your worksheet. The other really important thing around tactics is to think about how different tactics have the right time. Like, you don't just want to be doing the right thing, you want to be doing it at the right time. So when you're thinking about tactics, you're coming back, you might be back in that movement map that we sent you earlier. So thinking about, like, where is the movement that I'm involved with at, and what are the right tactics to support us at this time, or to take us along. And so this is kind of like 4 steps of a campaign that yeah, and these examples are from our campaign, oh gosh, maybe in like 2021, to stop armed police. Was it in 2021? Oh gosh, my brain. I had a kid, RIP my memory. So yeah, so you're thinking about, like, if you're just beginning your campaign, you're building your movement, right? Like, you're finding your people, and petitions are a great way to kind of like bring people in, because then they sign the petition, you can start communicating with them and ask them to do more things. I think it's really important. Hey, you know what's funny? Actually, on that tactic slide, we also had a petition, but it's yeah, So a petition is a tactic, it's not a whole campaign. So petition is a great way to build your movement, bring people in, get spread your messaging. Like within your vision, you'll be talking about your vision, within your petition, you'll be spreading your message by talking about your vision. You'll be educating people by really explaining the barrier to the vision, and then it will help people see why the aim that you've chosen for your campaign, that petition would relate to, why that is the right aim, and obviously also the who you're petitioning, and that will be the target. So petition can be a really useful way to kind of like get all the bits on the piece of paper as well, and to frame up your campaign. And a really easy way to bring people into your movement. Zoe, so like online hui or community meetings are another great way of doing that. And collaborating with other groups is also another great way of building your movement and finding like-minded people out there. There's lots of other things you could be doing there too, like market stalls, going to community meetings. Yeah, lots of different things. And on tactics within your handout, there is this cool resource I only actually just came across the other day by someone called Jean Sharp, and I haven't even read it all, but it's like very much like from the 80s or 90s, and I just love it. And so there's 198 methods of nonviolent direct action by Jean Sharp, and there's lots of cool ideas. And let's be honest, activism back in the day, they were very creative, and I think that's cool, and I'd love to see more of that coming back. But then we also have the Our Action Station toolbox that we've linked to you, and that has a whole bunch of different tactics, and we've grouped them into these 4. Actually, I think we ended up making them 5, including one about driving the media narrative. These 5 sections to help you think about, okay, this is where I'm at in my movement, what tactics are going to relate and be the right ones for the moment we're in. So attention generators, like what? So you're building your movement, you've gathered your crowd, and then you might do things out in the world to kind of create a trigger event or like draw more people's attention. So that might be rallies. You'd normally only do a rally once you knew you had the numbers to make it something that told a story, but also rallies. People sometimes choose to do rallies early on in a movement because there are also good ways of building connections and like face-to-face relationships with other people. So, we've all organized rallies and had 15 people turn out. It happens. But just make sure that if you are organizing a rally early on and you don't know you're going to get the numbers, think about what else you're getting out of it, or like what else other people is the movement or the people who are going to come get out of it. And posters is a great way to draw attention. Demonstrations of support. So this is when you start to think about using your power, showing how many people are on board. So it might be op-eds, open letters, survey results, polling results, badges, like people might wear badges or t-shirts. I've got this cool t-shirt on right now. This one's actually one of the Toi to Tatiti ones, but we also did for our TPB Together for Tatiti campaign, we did Together for Tatiti t-shirts, and we did placards, we did stickers on cars. Like, so you want to start to create movement. You want to get your active allies doing things that help show your passive allies, oh, there's something happening that I could get involved with, or start to show your neutrals or even your passive opposition, like, there's like lots of people that look like me, and lots of different people and diverse people care about the same issue. Like maybe it's important. So I think that's like that peer-to-peer demonstration of support. Unions use demonstrations of support, like they do things like pledges, like before they'll organize strikes. And then target confrontation. So that might be like in the union context, that might be a strike. So where you actually like tell your boss, nah, I'm not coming to work unless you make our health and safety conditions better. It might be delivering a petition to Parliament because you're trying to get the House of Representatives to pass a bill. And this talks about the police commissioner. We like delivered the open letter to the police commissioner, and there was also a Waitangi tribunal claim that we're involved with, which was like taking the conversation, the Waitangi tribunal reports to the Crown or advises the Crown. And as we all know, we're having a time with that. And so another form of, if you had a people power theory of change for your campaign. For example, like here in the Coromandel, right now, we're not going to convince Shane Jones to stop mining. We're not going to convince mining companies not to go after gold. We know that in times of economic unrest, gold prices go up, and so our lands and waters and mountains here become at risk. So actually, target confrontation is more about like what I did in the beginning of my activism life, which was like blocking mines and like physically like confronting the people trying to dig up our mountains. Or it might look like in Ihumātao, they used to go every week to outside that development company that's slipped my mind. It's not Fletcher's. They used to every week they would have rally outside Fletcher's to be like, we don't want you to build on our whenua. Yeah, and target confrontations are also a really great way of like creating a story and an optic that like kind of shows what you're fighting for and against. I think that's really important to remember, especially in direct actions. It's like not just about stopping the thing, it's about making sure the story you're telling when you're stopping the thing is effective and actually going to build support, or at least effectively stop the harm you're trying to work against. I think that is all for tactics. Is there anything that you would add, Vera, before we go to questions?
Oh, that was awesome. I loved your examples of the different campaigns that you were part of. That was really cool to listen to, even for me.
Oh, good question, Samira. How you'd engage with people, her question is interested to know how you'd engage with people like miners whose livelihoods and often their ancestors depended on mining. I love that question. One great example is I think it's like recognizing their place in the cogs of the system. Like for example, in up behind Whangamata, which is one of the places under big threat here, when we managed to stop it last time round, when we went and occupied the drilling rig, we took tons of chocolate and we took cards and hot cups of tea. And, you know, these teams of prospectors, so they were running the drilling rig that was taking the samples, they'd been flown in by helicopter into the middle of nowhere. So we knew that when we stopped the drilling rig and stopped their work, it's not like they could just go home, you know, like they were actually living on site. And so we took extra kai and we like made a real point of being like, this isn't about you. Do you want a cup of tea? And we had a lovely evening, like we had a like 24 hours before the execs and the police and all of that got flown in, where we literally broke bread with the people, the prospectors. We shared our music, we're playing cards. I think it's really important to, and that's why I love the systems map way of thinking about things, is thinking about the systems that uphold something, not about demonizing individual people. And I think and like interesting enough, like Coromandel Watchdog, who's the group that the main opposing, like the umbrella group that works to oppose mining here, actually lots of the people in that group, their ancestors were miners. And often we find the most amazing Tauiwi allies for Tiriti, the ancestors may have been perpetrators of some like pretty intense colonial harm. And I think often those people are, looking for ways to come to like rectify the harms of the past. But I think it's comes down to that real classic saying also about the behavior, not the person, and like recognizing everyone's innate humanity. And that can be really hard, especially at times like these when we're like having heated discussions with random people about like the realities of New Zealand history. Like some people like to pretend like colonization didn't happen, and it can get really, really heated, and it can get to a point that sometimes you feel like, oh, I don't even want to talk to you, but it's really important to leave the conversation before it becomes harmful. Like if you start to feel unsafe or feel like you're going to like do more harm than good in that conversation, just saying like, hey, let's disagree to disagree. And I think that's like really important work that we can do as change leaders, is to acknowledge that we're not going to, like, there's always going to be 15% of active opposition. We're not always going to be able to change everyone's points of view. But it's about like planting seeds and offering pathways back to justice and pathways to collective justice and liberation in the future. I think often and like just also like in terms of the mining example in specific, like if you think about in Taranaki when the oil and gas ban happened, the climate justice groups there were really influential in making sure that the Just Transition Centre was set up. Um, like thinking about and like I think the other things we can be doing is collectively thinking about work conditions. Like actually what we know about mining is it's a terrible job. Like you're underground, it's dusty, it's hard, you're often isolated, like big shifts, it's highly dangerous. Like actually what yes, it's how people earn their livelihoods, but it's not who they are, and given opportunities and support. Um, there's always places for them in our communities. And to be honest, lots of our like best intel has come from people who work for mining companies that would like to still want to see the Coromandel protected. Oh, okay, okay. We're going on. This is getting a bit like specific about mining, but I will just say, Greg, go, Jeff. We came about that a lot with the like mining things, especially with Coromandel. But actually, the facts of the situation is that there's already enough gold above ground to meet all our technological needs, and there is research, not just research. There is like some really cool e-waste mining um, initiatives happening that have been funded in Aotearoa. So, yeah, we need things, but like, let's be honest, we have pillaged most of the things we need already above ground, or there are other solutions. It just often takes um, a lot of things. Yeah, Indonesian coal, great point, but like also Indonesia, great place for renewables, right? And actually, a lot of the coal burning in Indonesia is driven by other countries wanting to sell their coal to Indonesia and building them coal or gas-fired power stations. Like there's often more of this. Um,
Oh, we may have just lost Ruby. Oh yeah. Oh, true. She did say that she needed to charge her laptop. Okay, awesome. Well, she'll probably just put it on charge and then try and join us later. But we pretty much are already at the end of our um presentation. And so if you guys have any more questions about what we talked about, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A and I'll try my best to answer them, even though I'm not Ruby.